Can you talk about, we'll just kind of go through this compensating family. Where's the polarity in that?
The polarity that I believe is very present in compensation in family business is the tension between equal and fair.
Yes. Oh boy.
And a lot of times we think equal is fair, and sometimes equal isn't fair.
Here, everybody has value and worth in the family business, but there is a lot of frustration in this hug of war when people are not willing to innovate and change.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's unpack the tradition and innovation polarity because it's so common in any family enterprise. And that the more common tension is not universally true, but the more common tension is that the leading generation favors tradition, the rising generation favors innovation. There's value in both. If you do one to the neglect of the other, you're guaranteed to get the overuses of that. If you only do innovation, you're
Yeah.
guaranteed to take on an enormous amount of risk. If you only do tradition, you're guaranteed to get outperformed by the competition, right? So there's value in both, and typically the rising generation has a higher tolerance for innovation because they have a longer time horizon, right? They've got time for cycles to run through themselves, and they have time for risk to actually have a disaster, and they still have time to recover. The leading generation has less of a roadway.
Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm.
Hi there, folks. I'm really excited you've joined us today. I've entitled this episode, number 60, Hug of War, Managing Polarities for Farm Families. And our guest today is Cathy Carroll. She's a coach. She's written this most amazing book called Hug of War, and its subtitle is How to Lead a Family Business with Both Love and Logic. So my intention for today is to take you on a journey through Cathy's book, and she is going to just inspire you to look at how your family business works in a different way than I think that probably many of you have ever seen before. Now, I am trained as a Hudson coach, and back in 2003, when I graduated from the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara, I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting Barry Johnson, who is a polarity expert. And I worked with him in a workshop when he was in his 60s. But as I was getting ready with Cathy, she's been working with Barry Johnson in his 80s. So he's still doing great work. And he's the one who's really behind the whole idea of polarity. So Cathy, let's start at the beginning. How did you come being a coach and especially with a passion for family business? Tell us your story.
Well, first of all, it's a delight to be here with you, Elaine. So thank you for inviting me onto your great podcast. Yeah, I actually grew up in a family business, not a farm family, although my grandparents did actually have a farm, but it wasn't really all that actively managed. Nevertheless, we had fresh eggs every day, which was lovely. And to be honest, there was a lot of drama in my family on my father's side. My father's the second of four children and my grandparents. And so when I graduated from school, I pursued a corporate career for 20 years, a pension actuary, got an MBA, spent 12 years in finance, marketing, and sales in the travel industry. And then in 2009, my father sucked me back into the family business. Right? It's like a Godfather story, right?
There's a
Just
story coming.
right, exactly. And I led his business for almost 3 years. And it was nothing, the business was nothing related to my grandfather. In fact, when my grandfather died, my father and his siblings hired attorneys. And 2 years later, my father inherited some industrial machinery companies that he promptly sold. And he started buying companies in his personal passion, which is team roping. And he is a competitive amateur header and healer at the time. He's in his 80s now, so he's not competing anymore. But by 2009, he had 5 different companies. We make ropes and saddles and training equipment for team roping athletes. And he noticed that all the companies were losing money. So he wanted to bring in a professional manager. He posted a position with a recruiter, somehow my sister planted the seed that he hire me. And so I got a call from a recruiter asking what I know about the rodeo industry. It didn't take me long to figure out that I was getting recruited for my father's job. Big surprise, I got hired. And my father paid the recruiter $75,000 to hire his daughter.
Oh, man.
It is a riot, isn't it?
Oh, boy.
And working for my father was the best of times and the worst of times at the same time. Loved the industry, loved the people. I got to know a part of the country and the world. I live in the U.S., but team roping is not exclusively U.S. In fact, it's
Oh,
only in Canada.
We have a group here in our own community in Boise.
Oh, terrific! Oh, wonderful. In that case, I'll plug the brand. Cactus ropes and fastback ropes are our two rope brands, and Cactus Saddle is our saddle brand. You can cut that out if you don't want to include it.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. And so it was really challenging working for my father for a whole host of reasons that I'm sure we're going to get into later in the podcast. But I chose to leave, and then I had this moment of self-reflection. What am I going to do with my life? And I was in my mid-40s, and I said, you know what? I think I want to be an executive coach, but I didn't really know what that was. So I applied to a few programs. I went to Georgetown, which has a terrific coaching training program. And halfway through the program, I realized, number one, coaching is nothing like I thought it was. I thought I'd get to tell people what to do. But coaches have all the right questions, not all the right answers. The second aha was I realized I really needed a coach when I was working for my father. In fact, I think my father could have benefited by having a coach, and my grandfather 2 generations ago, if he had had a coach, I think we could have had a very different outcome in our family. And the third aha is I looked at my entire life and I realized this is what I meant to do. I meant to bring leadership coaching to family businesses. And so I launched my practice in July of 2013, and I've never looked back.
And I'm so glad you did, because we have lots of people in the U.S. also listening to this podcast. And I guess before we dive into the book and all the wisdom you have in here, Kathy, do you have this available in audio?
I do.
Oh, perfect. Because most of the people listening to this, and you have about 1,000 downloads every episode now, because it's really become something where a lot of mothers in businesses, and I think you call that shadow influence, and we'll talk about that. They listen to the podcast and then they pass it on to someone in the family business or the dairy barn who needs to be listening to your wisdom while they're working. So this is really good news, folks. Hug of War is also available in audiobook. So that's fantastic. So first things first, you had a moment with your dad where he wasn't going to continue having you in the business, and you mentioned you went on to executive coaching, and that's our gain, his loss. But as I was reading your book, there's so many things, Kathy, and I'm just going to go to the table of contents first in terms of first of all, compensating family. So let's start with what a polarity is, because a polarity is something that needs to be managed. It's never solved. So the polarity example I often use for farm families is action and planning. And I'm on a mission to get more families have better plans in place. But they'll say, oh, we'll do it after Christmas. We'll do it after Easter. We'll do it, and things just don't get done, right? So can you talk about, we'll just kind of go through this compensating family. Where's the polarity in that?
The polarity that I believe is very present in compensation in family business is the tension between equal and fair.
Yes. Oh, boy.
And a lot of times we think equal is fair, and sometimes equal isn't fair.
Well, and I love the example you use in your book about having a peanut allergy. If you're not going to give your kids all peanuts, even if they have a peanut allergy, and they're all not going to carry EpiPens if they don't need them.
Yes.
And that's a whole presentation that's one of my most popular, called Finding Fairness in Farm Transition. So how would you help a farm family or a family business, because farms are family businesses, how do you help them unpack that polarity then?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the core polarity that I present in Hug of War, and that is the tension between two opposing mindsets. And this is a leadership challenge that's truly unique in family enterprises, because you've got these two right answers in the leader's brain. One right answer is the business mindset, and that's driven by logic, and it values profits and competition and meritocracy. This is the business world we know and love. But there's also this other mindset, the family mindset, which is driven by love, and it values fairness and sharing and unconditional belonging. And when you have these two mindsets living concurrently, you end up with two right answers. The example I like to use is, let's say you've got a brother-in-law who's not performing well. Well, the business mindset is quite clear. He needs to go. And yet the family mindset is also quite clear. Well, he's married to my sister and they're raising a special needs child. I need to give him a raise, right? Two completely right answers that are in utter opposition with each other. And that's what I call a polarity. And that's what Barry Johnson calls a chosen polarity. Not every polarity is natural in the world, like wet and dry would be considered a polarity. But in a family business, if you have a family in business, you have a chosen polarity. And so in the context of the equal and fair, the tension that I like to highlight with families is, all right, the business mindset says you should pay based on the market. Market wages are how you pay people. It's just the rules of business. In a family, the family mindset is, well, they're all my children. I don't want anyone to think that I love one more than the other. They're all working really hard. They should all get paid the same, regardless of what function they play in the family business. And that's a very fair, logical point of view. That's not un let's not understand. It was very understandable. So with any polarity, including action and planning, including wet and dry, including the family mindset and the business mindset, you map a polarity. And the simple way to map it is you get out a piece of paper and you draw a big plus sign on the piece of paper, and you put one pole name on one side and one pole name on the other side. So
Family mindset, business mindset.
exactly, family mindset, business mindset. And then above each pole, you define what are the upsides or the benefits of each pole. So in the context of compensation, what are the benefits of market-based compensation? Well, the benefits are this is the rules of business. This is what sets us up if we want to ever sell. We've got proper economics in place. We kind of know how to read our financials. And then what are the upsides of the family mindset where everyone gets paid the same? Well, you create a sense of harmony in the family. There's no jealousy that someone's making more than somebody else. Everybody's working hard. Nobody's worried about who loves me more than anybody else. But what are the problems if you only do the business mindset? What are the overuses of the business mindset or the challenges that arise if you only play market? Well, you miss out on all the benefits of the family mindset. And you may end up in a situation where you've got jealousy and you've got competition and you've got this resentment that can form in the family system because of this violation of the family mindset. However, what happens if you overuse the family mindset? What happens if you consistently rely on paying everybody the same no matter what? Well, in the long run, it's not sustainable, right? Over generations, you can't pay everyone the same in the long run. Number two, it creates actually a different sense of unfairness because if there is an inconsistency in effort, an inconsistency in contribution, then there's another level of resentment that can form where some people are working hard, other people are not working as hard, and everyone's getting paid the same. So in once you've mapped the polarity and you see all four corners of this dilemma, then you start to change the question from should we pay everybody the same or should we pay based on market? And you say, how do we get the best of market compensation or how do we get the best of equal compensation? And it changes the equation entirely because you're not choosing between an either or. You're trying to find the both and the best of one mindset and the best of the other mindset. There we go. The ampersand.
Yes. The ampersand. I have this in my office for a reason because it's both and, right? It's not either or. And I think if people listening to this and all the amazing examples you're going to give us today, it's about asking better questions, not having either or kind of thinking. So this is a really good thing to kind of chew on and listen to this podcast more than one time because the whole idea of polarities is it's not either or, it's we work and we play. We plan and we act. And the compensation one is one of your first chapters because that, of course, money causes a lot of tension and a lot of people, not really happy about what decisions have been made in that domain. The other thing I've often said to my son is, I actually had these baseball caps, Kathy, once, and I used to write work on them or mom on another hat. Be really clear about which hat you're wearing, whether you're coming from the family mindset or the businessman. I'm talking to you as your business partner. No, I'm talking to you as your mom. And so being clear, I think, which mindset you're in is really important, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people muddle that pretty much all together. So talk about what you mean then by domain crossover. How do people communicate in family business? As your dad, I'm really proud of what you do. You'll always be my son. But as your founder and the founder of this business, now I'm putting on my business mindset hat. I have some real issues with the fact that you don't seem to want to learn how to manage this business. And we're kind of stuck because I want to step back without stepping away. And how do I get you on board here? Next, Jim.
Yeah. Yes, a very common tension in the leadership and
So,
ownership succession. Yeah.
so what have you seen successfully for those domain crossovers then, Kathy, for people to be able to run the business as a business and still enjoy the family circle as well? What are some of the powerful questions you use as a coach?
Mm. Well, again, it's how do you get the best of both, right? Instead of this either or. But I'll highlight something really, I'm going to actually highlight a challenge of the domain crossover first. And that is that I noticed this early on in my coaching career when I was working with family members, when uh, people would leverage power in one domain to exact an outcome in the other domain. And it
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
It happened all the time. And sometimes it was they would leverage power in the business domain to get what they wanted in the family domain. The example I like to use, I had a client whose father said, you will not get a promotion in this business until you make nice with my new wife.
Oh, yeah.
And she was livid. My client was livid. How dare you thwart my professional success because you're forcing me to behave in a certain manner in the business domain? Conversely, I had another client who was frustrated because his son said, if you don't give me full access and power and authority in this business, you will not see your grandchildren.
Oh, and hey, you just hit a huge hot button for agriculture, because Kathy, the price of land and the assets and the number of zeros on balance sheets and the rules of estrangement is a PDF I give out many times. drjosscoleman.com is his website. That's weaponizing. That's emotional blackmail. Let's call that what that is.
Yeah. And it's using power over by controlling an outcome that you're seeking. And typically, in my experience, that use of hard power is unsustainable. It actually creates much worse outcomes in the long run. You may get what you want in the short run, but it does not lead to healthy relationships. Nobody in families likes to be cornered or boxed in. So
Yeah.
it creates a lot of problems. So I've seen more challenges with domain crossover than opportunities, in all honesty.
So another chapter of your book is shadow influencers, and I love the example you gave of a mom who intercepted a letter from her disgruntled son, because one of the other polarities you have is tradition and innovation. Can you speak to that example? I think the mom intercepted the letter, took her husband to Florida for 3 weeks, and the son really radically changed the business. Well,
Yeah.
and I've seen this in farm families too. A lot of young farmers listening they can't wait till their parents go south for the winter
Yeah.
as snowbirds, because then they can operate the operation in the way they choose to. And I'm not beating on founders here. Everybody has value and worth in the family business, but there is a lot of frustration in this hug of war when people are not willing to innovate and change.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's unpack the tradition and innovation polarity because it's so common in any family enterprise. And that the more common tension is not universally true, but the more common tension is that the leading generation favors tradition, the rising generation favors innovation. There's value in both. If you do one to the neglect of the other, you're guaranteed to get the overuses of that. If you only do innovation, you're
Yeah.
guaranteed to take on an enormous amount of risk. If you only do tradition, you're guaranteed to get outperformed by the competition, right? So there's value in both. And typically, the rising generation has a higher tolerance for innovation because they have a longer time horizon, right? They've got time for cycles to run through themselves, and they have time for risk to actually have a disaster, and they still have time to recover. The leading generation has less of a roadway. So that tension between tradition and innovation played out in this context of shadow influencers, which is my second of 3 chapters on the unique power dynamics. The first one being domain crossover, the second one being shadow influencers. And the story is a story of he was probably in his 30s at the time, in his maybe 40s, and his father was dead set against bringing in computers into the business. I mean, this was decades ago, right?
Um,
And so the dad went to, I think it was Florida or Arizona, and spent several weeks over the holidays or over the winter. And while he was gone, the son invested in a ton of technology, which was transformational for the business. It created enormous, of course, a short-term capital expense, but
yes.
lo-
Long-term
yeah,
gain.
very long-term efficiencies and lots of value created. And the dad came back and was livid at what happened. And so the son wrote this letter, and he just let it all hang out and screamed and yelled in this letter to his father. He sent it to his father, and somehow his mother intercepted it and saw it.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. Yes, and she actually held the letter back from the dad, and so she, in theory, prevented a huge relationship explosion from happening. And so she used her shadow influence as a force for good. And shadow influence, let's define what it is. It's when people without a formal authority, without formal ownership, without formal uh, power actually have enormous influence. And it's quite often the people who marry into the family, the image, the moms, the wives, but it's not exclusively that. There are men who are shadow influencers as well. And as you can tell, sometimes shadow influence is enormously helpful. And at the same time, shadow influence can be really problematic.
Oh, yeah. Which is why I have a book called Forming's In-Law Factor.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, there's a client I'm working with right now, 2 brothers who are very competitive with each other. They used to get along really well. They used to have a lot of fun. And the younger brother's new wife is constantly bugging her husband. Hey, why is your brother the CEO and you're the COO? That's not right. You should be the CEO. And so she's kind of creating all these, planting these seeds of competition, which is creating a lot of disharmony between the brothers.
So you're going to help those 2 brothers get clarity on what is actually happening and change the narrative. So that's a very good thing to do as a coach. We often say to Kathy, counseling is about recovery, coaching is about discovery. So I think what I love about the Hug of War book that you've so wonderfully crafted is how you explain everything so well, and you have pro tips in each chapter and really great questions and different language. And as here at Farm Family Coach, that's one of our core mission is to help farm families change their language. Like you still are going to have the same issues to manage back and forth in the family dynamic, in the business. But if you ask better questions, oh my goodness, you can look forward to some much better results. So in the back of your book, you very conveniently listed all the different kinds of polarities. So we've talked about the family, a place of love, the business, a place of logic. We've talked about the family mindset, the business mindset. Tell me about the polarity of emotional rational, because I've been told that over 80% of decisions, even in business, are emotional ones, sometimes not always the most rational.
Yes, it is interesting. A lot of research that I've read has said that we make almost all of our decisions emotionally, and then we use reason to justify them, which I find fascinating and personally quite resonant. Right.
Oh, right. So another one, when we were talking earlier about fairness, and my definition of fairness is helping everyone in the family business be successful. And that's going to be different strokes for different folks on how that actually unfolds. So talk to our audience about reveal and conceal, because I believe very strongly that financial transparency, personally and business, in a healthy way is good for everyone, because then there's no secrets, no surprises. Everybody understands why certain decisions are made. So explain to the audience, the folks who are listening to this, the farm family say, "Oh, Elaine, I would never tell our daughter-in-law what this farm is worth, because then she'd be a gold digger." And I'm thinking, what? And they're concealing as much, holding things very close to their chest, as you might say in Texas. And then you have the others that are open, and there's no surprises. Everybody knows what the cash flow looks like, why we're having a good year, why we're not having a good year. So what is the reveal and conceal polarity? Can you explain that one, Kathy?
You bet. Now, I'm going to use a slightly different analogy and then go back to the example that you gave.
Okay.
So the example that I like to share on this is when you're building an estate plan. Let's say you have your estate plan and you're about ready to sign the documents, and one member of the couple says, "We really need to share this information with our children." And the other member of the couple says, "Hell no, we can't tell our children how much they're going to inherit. They're going to become entitled brats, and they're going to just sit back and wait for their inheritance, and never going to find purpose in life." And the one who wants to share the information says, "But how can they do their life planning if they don't have knowledge of what's going to happen? How do we build trust with our children if we're hiding so much information?" And so you can see they are on opposite ends of the reveal conceal, or sometimes I call it transparency and privacy polarity.
There you go. That's another way to say it.
Yeah, and there's value in transparency, and there's risk with only being transparent and non-private. There's value in privacy, and there's risk of being really overly private. A lot of estate planning attorneys that I've met, when they first start working, they often guide their clients to conceal information or to be private. And the really experienced estate planning attorneys end up flipping the switch, and they lean much more towards the transparency or the reveal side, as you have over time learned the value of transparency. The reality is the answer is one that changes over time, because with any polarity, there is no one right way. There's no single right answer.
And
You're
it's
always going to be managing the tension between these two opposite poles. And so you might start when your children are 5, 7, and 9, you might start the conversations talking about family values. You might not get into a lot of details. Maybe when the kids are 15, 17, and 19, you might start talking about trusts, or the more specific structures that are related to wealth transfer and things like that. And then maybe when they're 25, 27, 29, you might get more specific about dollar amounts and distribution provisions and things like that. So the answer to the question of holding the tension between reveal and conceal changes over time. As the context changes, the solution changes, because there's no one fixed answer. So in your example, where we can't tell our daughter-in-law what's going on, like maybe while they're dating, you're less transparent about the specifics of the value of the land. I mean, you might be a little bit transparent, but you might choose not to be as open book. And then once the marriage is complete and life is grand, then you can be more specific. And frankly, in proper estate planning, you really need to be very transparent when you're doing prenuptial agreements and things like that. That level of transparency is the foundation of a successful agreement and builds trust in the long run. So like you, I have a poll preference, which is normal. We all have poll preferences. I have a preference for transparency as well. And that actually came from seeing what can go wrong too quiet, right? And there's also such a thing as too transparent.
right. And so it's being wise and also asking good questions. And I remember the day my son and daughter-in-law sat on the couch, and they were dating at the time. And we had a conversation about what opportunities there were for my son to be part of the family farm business. He's now 37. He's been married since 2013. Lovely wife and 3 grandkids living right next door, which I don't take for granted. But all this to say, once we had the conversation about what the vision was for the farm and what the opportunities were, it was very interesting. Once they became engaged a month later, I think part of that transparency was, is there an opportunity And yes, of course, we build on that, but we also have guidelines around our family table discussions about, what we're talking about right now is confidential. It stays in this room. And again, you become wise as to how much to share at what time and also what age and stage the recipient is at. And so I just have this picture right now, Kathy, of a young farmer who's 42 listening to this conversation and go, oh man, Elaine, I just wish I could get even a crack of transparency from my mom and dad as to their plans for the future because I know nothing. I'm still an employee. I need to have equity and ownership, and everything here is pretty much closed up. So what's another um, polarity that I think you do a really good job of explaining, Kathy, is privileges and responsibilities, because you mentioned before about the brothers who are getting paid exactly the same, but one brother's working twice as hard. It is not fair because they're not being compensated for all the time they're putting in. But talk about that dance in family business between, what is a privilege and what is a responsibility.
This one was a really hard one for me to wrap my head around because I had a huge blind spot.
Okay.
So, in the context of privileges and responsibilities, let's hold the poles.
Okay.
It was very easy for me to see the overuse of privilege.
I said like boss's son, I gotta do, but I
Right. Well, and it's entitlement and it's it's the stereotype that every young family business inheritor gets stuck with or runs the risk of and entitlement is a thing. It's not, I mean, it's a label for a reason, right? It does exist. Although what I have noticed in my work is that people leaders that I'm working with are usually far more over focused on responsibility, and they are suffering because they are taking on so much responsibility. It feels so much pressure. Too much responsibility feels so much pressure. And there's this tendency for certain people to overperform. They take on the responsibilities beyond what they need to take on, which actually creates the conditions for the underperforming, which then can lead to entitlement. And you actually end up resentment on both sides. The people who are overperforming are filled with resentment because they're working so hard and nobody's doing anything. And the ones who are underperforming, which is enabled by the overperformers, feel resentful. They never get a chance to help. They never get a chance to contribute, right? So there's really frustration on both sides of that. So I think of the tension between privileges and responsibilities to be held much like the tension of support and challenge, or frankly, strict and nurturing in parenting. So in when you're raising a child, or when you maybe we'll put it in the business context, when you have an employee and you give them a really intense challenge, that employee is going to thrive with a ton of support, right?
yes.
If you
Yes.
give someone something that's not that challenging, they don't need a lot of support, right? So if you have someone who's taking on a ton of responsibility, then invite them to take on some of the privilege that goes along with it. And if you've got someone who's wallowing in the privilege, invite them to take on some of the responsibility that goes along with it. These are values that are paired up, right? If you're going to take on privilege, take on responsibility. If you're going to take on responsibility, take on privilege. Now, that was really hard for me to wrap my head around because I am horrified by the idea of being entitled. I don't want to be known as entitled. So I was totally taking on all the responsibility and wouldn't touch any privilege because privilege was bad in my mind. And maybe even the word privilege is kind of a dangerous word because it has a little
Yes.
fear to it, right? But there's value in actually recognizing that if you're going to take on a ton of responsibility, it's not going to actually feel good in your head and in your heart until you have commensurate privilege that keeps that healthy balance and keeps you in the upsides of privilege and the upsides of responsibility.
Well, I think you and I are both big fans of Brene Brown because you also wrote in your book about how her teachings on shame and vulnerability else helped you with that blind spot as well, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And I know that this is an issue for many farm families too that are doing well in rural communities. Everybody's, pretty aware of everybody else's or at least they think they are aware. The Irish have this lovely proverb, Kathy, every front door looks beautiful. So you don't always really know what's going on behind the front door. But you make this assumption, well, it must be nice to be them, da da da. But again, you have no idea what has brought them to that point, right? And so we need to reserve judgment, and we need to come from curiosity with our questions. And as we build out these polarity maps, and you've done an awesome job in your book of being very practical about helping people identify what those poles are. Is it work? Is it play? Another one that I think is very poignant for farm families that I like you to speak to is investing everything back into the business or harvest. So the polarity between everything just goes back into the farm, or no, we have to harvest some of the profit from this farm business to build up our personal wealth so that we do have some liquidity beyond the business to help navigate the family dynamic. So talk about investing in harvest poles.
Yeah. Such a classic challenge in a family enterprise. Yeah, this is one where we often have really strong pull preferences. Those who want to invest back in the business are really convinced that that is the right way. That's the one right thing to do. And what happens if you invest all of your profits back into the business? What's the risk that can happen? Will you get? Yeah, go ahead. You answer that.
Well, all kinds of economic pressures, and this podcast is airing in January of 2026, and it's a new year and new hopes, and this year it's going to be different, and this is the year we're going to get our debt serviced properly, and this is the year we're going to find new markets. And the economic stress and the financial stress on our audience, on farm families, is real. And so this is a good discussion to have as to, let's not neglect what the family dynamic needs, right? That domain as well as the business domain.
Yeah, in many respects, it's a similar polarity to specializing and diversification, right? If you plow all of the profits back into the business, you've got all of your eggs in that one basket and you had nothing to counterbalance that risk. The other challenge that can arise is you have in any family with several children, you often have some people who are operating in the farm and you have some who are not operating in the farm. And those people who are not operating in the business look at that thing and they're
Okay.
branded as being these incredibly wealthy people on paper, but they have nothing to show for it. There's no value to being a member of this farm family because there's no distribution, right? There's no allocation of any profit into a personal family. And so another conditions for massive resentment. I have been a part of this family for 50 years. I've never seen a dime, right? And everyone thinks I'm this wealthy person, but for the sake of what? I've never gotten any benefit. So there are a few different reasons why revisiting that question of invest and harvest can be really important. And as I said earlier, the answer to that question may change over time. So in a particular year, you may want to really focus on reinvesting because there's a unique opportunity. There's a particular, segment or commodity that's really coming online that you could really add a lot of value in. And then there are other times when it makes more sense to actually pull some of the profits out of the business and move them into the family side. So you build some of that security. I mean, one of the things that I think of when I think of farm families, and this is another polarity that's not unique to family business, but I think could be really alive in the farm family domain, is this tension between productivity and sustainability,
Yes.
right? Like you could uh, really get enormous profits out of a piece of land and then deplete its soil nutrients. And I mean, in the short run, you reap a huge profit, but in the long run, you're actually, um, uh, uh, I guess, undermining the longer term viability. And it takes time for that land to become resourceful again, right? So how do you manage the tension between that productivity and sustainability? It's a short term, long term tension, right? In the short
And as you're saying this, I'm thinking canola rotations. Because if you grow canola, and a lot of farmers who push their rotations are finding disease problems. So yeah, that's a perfect example of sustainability and taking the cash now and harming the land for later, which is
yes.
not wise stewardship either. Um, so those are some of the big ones. I've got all kinds of notes. I was gonna give this book, Kathy, I'll tell you, to my son, but he doesn't have a lot of time to read, but I think I'll get him the audio copy. So I didn't at first I didn't mark it up, and then I said, "Oh, I'm going to mark this book up," and I've got dog ears and all kinds of things happening in here But you said families with good conflict management skills have a competitive advantage. And can you talk about the difference between task conflict and relationship conflict? Because I think that's another really key point for farm families.
Yes, absolutely. First, I will give credit where credit is due. I got this from Think Again, written by Adam Grant. He talks about how task conflict, which is when you've got two people on one side of the table trying to tackle a problem on the other side of the table, it is so important to engage in task conflict because that's how you're brainstorming the best ideas. That's how you're challenging assumptions. That's how you're coming up with the best answers. If you don't engage in task conflict, you're muddling through, everyone's going along to get along, and you're not actually going to get the best answers. Relationship conflict is when you've got one person on one side of the table and one person on the other side of the table, and the issues related to the relationship. That happens all the time in family firms, and it is very destructive to outcomes. He did research and learned that the teams that engaged in task conflict had much better outcomes than the teams that engaged in relationship conflict when they were faced with the same challenge.
I think that's where we get the phrase attack the issue, not the person.
Yeah.
And also, again, but it's also good to note that there's different types of conflict, and the task conflict is the productivity, getting things done, attacking the issues, and obviously the teams that focus on what is the real issue here. But also, I remember another example from your book where a brother and sister were in business together, and the brother he just didn't even want to have to deal with the sister. She was asking for more wages. You mentioned things like country club fees, and I'm going, oh, must be nice to have a golf course membership. But her reasoning for wanting and the salary, and I think too, and this is a shout out to all of the farm men and women, the next gens, the Gen 2s, I'll call them, who have spouses, young families. They're working on their farms. Many of them are working in off-farm jobs to support the cash flow of the farm. They're in their 30s, early 40s. They're exhausted. They can't put anything more on their plate. And yet, I would just want to remind those people listening, ask for help and don't try to do it all on your own. And when things aren't working, if mom and dad aren't revealing and they continue to conceal, we've done lots of other podcasts, Kathy, on writing letters, like what the son did in your example was it was an angry letter. But I also have encouraged families to write a letter to the founders asking for what you need and do it in a kind, appreciative, and gracious way, because you don't have to stay stuck on the negative side of the pole, because what you've done in your book is you've given tons of very practical examples of how to apply this. So I'd also like you to speak to the saying when the mom says, in our world, the family always comes first. And so you have a polarity here in chapter 9, because I have another speaker friend who has a whole presentation on this, and you say a singular focus on the family first can lead to problems for the business, and a singular focus on business first can lead to problems for the family. Family business leaders must consider both the needs of the family and the needs of the business for long-term sustainability. Asking whether a family business should be family first or business first is like asking whether one should inhale or exhale to stay alive. It's the wrong question. And here's what you say. The right question is, and I put a big square around this, how do we navigate the inherent tension that exists between the family and the business so that we get the best for both the family and the business?
Yeah, I don't think I could say anything to make it sound any better than how I wrote it.
Those are your words exactly.
Yeah.
Good job. So I think just to start percolating. So as we wrap up today, and we could talk for 2 or 3 hours, Kathy. It's been a delight to have you, because I think what you've done with your training as a coach, your experience at your MBA, your experience in the business with your dad, and obviously now with all that your clients have shown you and made you aware of, that this dance, and when I was trained by Barry Johnson, he used the diagram of an infinity loop. And so I start rocking back and forth. Yes, I want to work, but I also want to play. Yes, I want to plan, but I also want to act. Yes, I want to be in the family domain, but I also like making profit on the business side. So to know that it's not, it has to be either this or that. And I'm very concerned in agriculture as we go into a new year that people sit down in a warm sunbeam on the inside of the glass in the house and really think about what they want, how they want things to be different this year going forward. And you have provided a very good roadmap in this book, Hug of War, to help families look at where are the poles that they're stuck on, and how are they going to navigate those changes. So, of all the things that you could say to your family businesses to get them moving, I'm going to say get the audio copy, or that's a good place to start. I'm going to go back to it again. As I said, I've referred it to many families already because I think it's just a really good roadmap for helping people understand. So going into this new year, Kathy, what are you telling your business clients? What are you helping them unpack to understand to just make that breakthrough so that the poles they're not getting stuck on?
Yeah. Well, when a client is in an intractable conflict with someone else in the family, I get curious about whether or not they only see half the picture. And when I say half the picture, they see their pole preference and they don't recognize that they're in a polarity. And the challenge with that is if you don't recognize that it's a polarity, you keep putting force against force because one person or one faction in the family is seeing one side of the pole, the other faction is seeing the other side of the pole. And the weird thing is they're both right. They're
Yes.
both right, because that's what's so beautiful about a polarity. Nobody has to be wrong. Everybody gets to be right. And it's a mind-bending thing to actually hold two truths that are in utter opposition at the same time. It's hard. It requires our brains to hold a level of complexity we're not used to. Our brains are trained for either or thinking. And it's really hard to actually rewire our brains to both and. And so if you're in a fight with someone, that seems to be the same fight over and over. A really simple one is a lot of couples struggle with spend and save as a polarity, right? It's a really easy one, really common one in marriages. But if you're in that kind of a conflict, see if you can identify what is the value that you hold and what is the value that the other person holds. And then frame the polarity, get out that plus sign, talk about the benefits of each pole. What happens if you only do one to the neglect of the other? Find the overuses or the downsides of each pole. Then you can see the full picture. And once you see the full picture, the next steps become really clear.
Right. I'm also a very visual learner. So I think that's also very helpful for our audience is to just draw that big cross X in the middle of the page. Top is what's good about the pole that you're in, bottom is what's not so good, and start trying to unpack. And again, when we do our conflict dynamic profiles with our clients, Kathy, one of the most positive conflict behaviors is the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And maybe everybody also needs to go to a craft store this year and buy an ampersand. And in your conversations, just think about how we can ask more powerful questions and what would be the downside of that and what would be the upside of that. And the upside of our conversation today is that now we have thousands of farm families across the US and Canada and those who do family business who now know about Cathy Carroll from Texas and your work. And I just want to say thank you so much for all the time and energy and effort you've put into crafting this book, because I think it's going to be a game changer for a lot of families in business. So thank you so much. And thank you for your time today. And folks, again, we only ask with this podcast that you listen again, you share it with someone in your family that you know will benefit from hearing it. And again, come back to Farm Family Harmony podcast for the next episode. We're in year 3 now, and it's thanks to you as listeners that we continue to grow. and also go to places like Australia and South Africa and Ireland, and a shout out to the whole world who needs to know how to do this lovely dance of the infinity loop. So wishing you all a really great year ahead with your family and a really great year ahead with your business. And thank you again, Kathy. So blessings to everyone on your journey. Don't give up. Write those letters. Read Hug of War and start navigating those polarities. Now you know what a polarity even is. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.